if the benefits of the flipped classroom, or at least flipped lessons, seem to outweigh the negatives, what do? I think the first step is we got to figure out, how would you package that direct instruction? Then, where are you going to put it? How will kids access it? Number 2, I think we have to go back to temp. What are you trying to package? Are you just trying to tell them or teach them about something? Or are you trying to encompass the T, the E, and the M all in one? What you choose to do in your podcast or your recordings or your documents will differ based on what you choose to package. And then we have to think about this. How will this change our in-class time? In the past, I gotta say, there are times I came to class a little underprepared about something, but I could lecture my way out of any type of time issue. I could spend 3 days on the Cuban Missile Crisis rather than 2, rather than 1. If we've done all of our recording and our podcasting, and kids are walking into class having learned the basics of the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the chemical reaction, or the musical scale that we want them to know, we don't have that luxury to then tap dance and go, well, let's talk a little bit more about the G major scale. You have to have something for them to do. And so for sometimes, I get it, to be very pragmatic about it, you don't have the ability to tap dance, because if kids are doing the process as much as we want them to, they are coming in ready to do the next step, which is application. And so you've got to have something ready for them. So in terms of a term, the idea of a podcast is that it is an episode of a downloadable series, meaning that it is recorded and stored somewhere for downloads whenever people want. It's not a streaming thing necessarily, meaning that it's not just always on, but it is a finite file that is stored somewhere for later download. Right now, many of us may have access to podcasts on things like iTunes or iTunes U, which is where many universities are starting to do some of this. Khan Academy or TED Ed is another place where many of these podcasts are being housed, stored, organized, cross-referenced, things like that. If you haven't had experience listening to podcasts on your own, those are some good places to start listening. Usually they are free, and they come on a variety of topics, both scholarly and things that we would never cover in K-12 education, but that we as lifelong learners want to know more about. How to fix an engine, how to change the air filter in your car, things like that. So a lot of podcasts are out there. These are a couple places where you can get some of them. The point of today's session, though, is to talk about the idea of making our own. Because as much as TED and Khan Academy are trying to revolutionize teaching, and they're trying to say that these are the most interesting and most concrete ways to capture today's generation, video instruction, I think they're missing the boat on some of their topics. They're talking about things that are interesting, that are concrete, that are distinct points of content. But oftentimes what we are asked to do in K-12 education is balance the content pieces like Cuban Missile Crisis and things that are skill-based, how to read, how to write, how to think. And those are much more difficult for us as teachers to conceptualize. Clearly, then they're going to be much more difficult to put into a visual format. And I just don't see these pre-packaged things there yet. I think they have potential to be there, but it's just not happening yet. So the point of today is to talk about how do we start to make these podcasts on our own to better serve our own curricular needs, our own differentiated students' needs, and where we are using them in terms of the temp progression. One way, if you're interested in just recording audio podcasts, you can use a couple of programs. One of them is Audacity, and this is a free download for both PC and Mac. And the other is GarageBand, which comes standard on many Macintosh computers. Both of these just record audio and do allow you the opportunity to do some editing once you have hit stop after your recording. Things like taking out any mess-ups, taking out the verbal pauses, like, whatever it is that you happen to say when you're recording. And these do allow you to put in some effects, things like fades or crossfades or gains, so that you can add different effects to make your audio podcast a little bit more enjoyable. Now, if you'd like to move up to something similar to what you're watching now, we call that screencasting. And this is the idea of your computer recording both the visual and audio portion of what's going on in your screen. And so many tech demos on YouTube use this type of software. And so anytime somebody's trying to show you something, they're probably using screencasting technology. The way I use it is the idea of narrating over class PowerPoints and then making them into these podcast type things that students would be watching ahead of time to grasp the ideas before we start applying them in a group setting once they actually get into the classroom. A couple of programs that I would recommend. For the Mac, you might use ScreenFlow, which is what I'm using right now. If you are a PC user, you may want to look at something called Camtasia. Now, both of these do cost, and so the ScreenFlow is about $80 with the educator's discount, and the Camtasia Studio is a little bit more expensive, but many districts do have district copies that can be either downloaded for free or more likely for a small fee. If you're not ready to invest yet into the process and just want to get your feet wet with a couple of free ideas, here are some names you can look up on the internet. One is Screencast-O-Matic, and this will be a program that we will be using in class when we all get together at our conference. Another one is Jing, Jing. A couple more, ScreenR, and then Screencastle. You can also just use PowerPoint itself. So if you have your lesson all set up in PowerPoint and you've decided which part of the temp model you would like to be using this with, you can use PowerPoint to record narration. And then when you are finished recording narration for each slide, you save the whole thing as a movie. And therefore, you can just take that, usually a QuickTime movie if you're using the Mac version, you can take that movie and upload that directly to wherever you are housing these videos. So you don't even need to look at anything fancier than that. Now, there are benefits to using the free versions, these things that are web-based, and that they are obviously free, pretty quick to set up, pretty quick to use. Push one button and you're recording. You are ready to go. The downside to these free versions is that you most likely cannot do any post-production editing. So, for example, with Screencast-O-Matic, you have 15 minutes, and once those 15 minutes are over, you are done. You can't do any editing, you can't take out any mistakes, you can't do any other additional features. If your mouse is moving around, that's going to be totally visible. You can't add things in later. I did start some of this podcasting with some of the free versions, but quickly moved to the ones where we did have to pay for them because the lack of post-production editing proved to be relatively frustrating, because I tend to have a lot of verbal pauses such as like, things like that. I wanted to take those out. And unfortunately, things like Jing or Screencast did not allow me to do that. In addition, many of these free products do force you to house your videos on their server. So you cannot take that and then put it onto YouTube directly. You have to direct your students to Jing's servers, which, just like any other server, could go down at any moment. And so if that is frustrating and that you're not able to retain local control of your videos, that is another potential downside to the free versions. The benefits of the paid versions are vast. One, they seem a lot more stable. They give you a lot more options in terms of recording and in the post-production world. You can add things in, take things out, move things around, all kinds of things that you would normally do making any sort of video. These screencasting products for pay allow you to do that. So even if you're semi-serious about this, I think investing in those pretty quickly is a good idea. So once you've got the product chosen, what is the process? For me, I like to use PowerPoint as a base. That is what I would use in an in-class lecture to begin with. It gives me a good chronological look at whatever topic we're talking about, and that reminds me of what we need to talk about. Once I've got PowerPoint open, I open up my ScreenFlow, and I go ahead and hit record, and then I kind of go. Sometimes it's pretty easily done the first time. Other times they're very editing intensive when I've screwed up like 10 bazillion times. I think one thing you'll notice is that the idea of your own podcasting personality is something that needs to be developed. It is a little weird to be kind of lecturing to a microphone. There is a benefit to lecturing in class, to getting that idea out there. You can see kids' reactions. You can see their expressions when they're confused. You're able to ham it up a little bit or move more quickly through a topic when you sense that they've gotten it. When I'm sitting here in my living room talking to this microphone, I don't get that kind of feedback. I kind of have to guess. And it does seem a little weird when you're just talking to the wall. So perhaps some personality issues come out with that. Ultimately, once you have created your podcast, you must decide how you're going to get this to your students. This is ultimately the most important thing, because while it is fun to make podcasts and just listen to them on the weekends, they're not exceptionally entertaining. And ideally, they're much more informative to the students if you can get it to them. And so the biggest thing we need to consider is the idea of access. So some things to consider. If you post it to something like YouTube, which is pretty universally accepted and out there, those podcasts need to be limited to 15 minutes. Additionally, if you're borrowing any content that has been previously released, you are dealing with copyright issues. So you need to be exceptionally careful of that, knowledgeable of those laws, and work within the law to make sure that those are things that you can post. Another thing we have available to us here in Adams 12 is the idea of uploading videos to Google Docs. Now, if you talk to the tech people, they may say that uploading them to Google Docs and then sharing them with the world is a not great use of space. I haven't heard that yet, but if Google Docs is a shared district thing, I can see how there could be objections to that. But ultimately, once you upload it and then share it with the world, you do get an internet address that you can post somewhere for students to access. I know some schools and teachers are using Moodle, which would be another similar way of getting that link posted for students. At Legacy and many other schools, there is an intranet or a public drive that students can have access to. One final thing to think about is the idea of just burning DVD copies of this so that students could take that and watch it in their living room. I've had many students say, we've got spotty internet connection at home, I can't use YouTube, it's too slow. Although many students then say that they can access this by their phone. Okay, great. But I have not had a student ever say in the last couple of years, I don't have access to a DVD player. So while they may be trying to get out of something at some point, the DVD seems to be a last resort for students, and then they can't say that they don't have